info. She is talking about ghosts hanging around what some say is a real-life haunted house in Metro Detroit.
Haunted houses pop up all over the place this time of year.
A new Wall Street Journal report profiles the many parents who think they can see ghosts, specters, and mysterious movements on their advanced baby monitors.
Baby crib.
I freaked out. I stopped what I was doing and I ran upstairs and I grabbed my daughter.
Heather says this so-called ghost scratched her daughter Lily and attacked her too.
You are tuned in to the Ghost Signal. Hello and good morning or evening wherever you are across the 24 time zones, and welcome to the Ghost Signal. If this is your first time finding the Ghost Signal, I'm so happy to have you along. But if you are returning for more, welcome back. This is episode 7, Family Troubles, in which we take a look at the history of the infamous Bell Witch of Tennessee in a supercharged graveyard shift where we will hear from a Redditor who used to live close by and hear his experiences with the witch. A few announcements before we begin. If you have a true ghost story for the Graveyard Shift segment or a twisted tale of terror for the Light in the Attic Patreon segment, please send it to the ghostsignalpodcast@gmail.com or visit theghostsignalpodcast.com and submit them there. If I read it on the show and you include a mailing address with your submission, I will send you a Ghost Signal sticker, a 3 a.m. sticker, and maybe some business cards too. Spread the word. Come on, you know you want to. The Ghost Signal Patreon is live if you so wish to contribute to the show in that way. There is a $1 tier called the Spirit tier, where you can listen to episodes ad-free on the same day as the regular episode releases, and there is also a $5 tier called the Spectre tier, in which you also gain access to ad-free versions of the episodes, but also a Light in the Attic where I narrate creepypastas from all across the internet, and a short video where you can take a peek behind the curtain of the Ghost Signal. Are you a spirit or a spectre? Choose the tier that's right for you. There is also a Discord server for the Ghost Signal. Discord is free to join, so feel free to jump in anytime to say hi, and interact with other listeners who share a taste for the paranormal. Soon there will also be community gaming, where you can join me and others for a rousing game of Phasmophobia or similar such titles. So download the Discord app, create your free account, and come hang out with us on the Ghost Signal podcast server today. Now finally, on to content. At the beginning of the United States' journey as a nation, westward expansion was labeled as manifest destiny, and Americans were encouraged to settle the wild frontier west of the Appalachians. The problem was that those lands had already been settled by Native Americans, who had already been here for centuries. And if you found a patch of land that they didn't want, chances are you probably didn't want it either. This is going to be a long one, dear listeners, so get comfortable, because you're in for a wild ride. Prepare for dead air.
Dead air.
In early 1805, John and Lucy Bell moved to a small farming village in the newly established state of Tennessee from their land in North Carolina. He was trained to be a cooper, which is another name for barrel maker. That combined with his farming meant he had built up a little bit of wealth, so he decided to head west to the Red River Valley of Tennessee, along with about 10 other families, including Frederick Batts and his brother Benjamin. As the families all settled into their new lives on the frontier, disputes arose, and one such dispute led to John Bell being excommunicated from the local Baptist church, in which he was an elder in 1818, and created lifelong enemies of the Batts family in the process. It is also interesting to note that Lucy Bell's maiden name was Lucy Williams, and she was John Williams Jr.'s younger sister. John Williams Jr. was also Kate Batts' father, making Lucy Bell Kate Batts' aunt. Kate Batts was said to be a spiteful, mean-spirited lady who was thought by many to be the source of the curse, since she believed she was wronged in a land purchase gone awry. It was whispered that Kate secretly practiced witchcraft and conjured up the spirit that haunted the Bells throughout the years as her way of getting even. Others say Kate was just a solitary and eclectic woman, and the Bells' troubles were caused by settling on land that should never have been settled on to begin with. One such story states that one of the boys had found a partial human skull on the property and brought it back to the house to show off what they had found. Lucy immediately scolded him and told him to put it back where he found it, and many feel that this event is the one that acted as the catalyst for all that follows. According to legend, the first manifestation occurred in 1817, when John and his sons were hunting on their property and encountered a beast that shook them to their core. It had the head of a rabbit and the body of a dog, and vanished into thin air the moment John shot at it. Soon afterwards, strange gnawing and scratching sounds were heard all across the Bell property, finally moving into the family cabin. The phenomena grew in intensity. Chains were heard rattling in the walls every night, and it became a serious nuisance for the Bells. They first suspected that their neighbors were playing pranks on them, of which they vehemently denied. They started seeing more strange creatures in the woods surrounding their home, creatures that stood upright, tall as an average man, and could speak. Huge birds that could also speak were seen roosting in the trees. In January of 1806, Betsy Bell was born, and was the first of the family to be born in Robertson County, Tennessee. For reasons unknown, she became the focus of the spirit's rage. She would wake up with strange noises in her bedroom, and when she would try to get out of bed to investigate, her hair would be tied in knots around one of the bedposts. The spirit would randomly slap her across the face and leave welts in the shape of handprints on her cheeks. Everyone would hear the slap and see her recoil, but no one would be near her. It also slapped her younger brothers on the legs, with the same handprint on them as well. Rats could be heard gnawing on their bedposts at night, but no rats were ever found in the cabin. It would throw rocks and sticks at the house at all hours, and eventually that too moved inside, the sounds of rocks breaking their belongings but not actually causing any damage. John Bell Sr., frustrated and terrified, yelled into thin air for the spirit to identify itself. Then a woman's voice seemed to emanate from the wall, saying simply, "Kate Batts, witch." This led to the idea that it was the spirit of Kate Batts herself, but she outlived John Bell Sr. by 22 years. But for as much as it was tormenting the family, it seemed to have an affection for Lucy. In the fall of 1820, she became afflicted with a severe case of pleurisy, a condition in which the tissues that line the lungs become inflamed and makes breathing very painful. And it would very nearly cost Lucy her life had it not been for the witch. It would sing her church hymns, would say supportive, nurturing things to her, and even materialize hazelnuts and grapes out of thin air for her. But as Lucy regained her strength and her health improved, John Bell Sr. began to deteriorate. As it was singing Lucy back to health, it would relentlessly cuss John, and this remained the witch's MO for the rest of the ordeal. John Bell swore the family to secrecy for obvious reasons. They managed to keep the secret for over a year, but the word eventually got out, and the Bells' closest neighbor, James Johnston, offered to help in any way he could just as the haunting was becoming intolerable. James and his wife were invited to spend the night in the Bells' cabin with them, to read Bible passages and bless the house in an attempt to drive the witch away. One night led to several, and with the spectral phenomena only getting stronger, James had decided that more people were needed to be successful. This resulted in a committee being formed and an investigation being launched. It's also interesting to note that the term witch is being used quite loosely here. It would be more accurate to describe the entity as the Bell poltergeist than anything, based off the original documentation found in Richard William Bell's book, Our Family Troubles, as he was a direct eyewitness to the activity. In very short order, the Bell Witch became a national sensation, kind of like The Exorcist of the 19th century. People came from great distances to experience this phenomena for themselves. A popular story associated with the Bell Witch is the tale of Andrew Jackson, soldier, general, and future president, coming to spend a night with the Bells. Jackson owned quite a bit of land in Robertson County and knew many of the residents from the time they spent in the military together, fighting in the Creek Wars and the Battle of New Orleans. General Jackson was said to be traveling to his famous duel with Charles Dickinson at Harrison's Mill in Logan, Kentucky, but that occurred in 1806, about 15 years prior to the Bell haunting. It's much more likely he came to the Red River Valley to finalize a land transaction, selling one of his properties to his brother-in-law, and decided to see the witch for himself on a whim. According to legend, while en route to the farm, one of Jackson's men flippantly stated that he had a silver bullet for her if she showed up. Their supply wagon immediately seized up, and nothing the men did succeeded in getting it to move. Jackson's intuition served him well, and he apologized to the witch for his man's audacity. Then a voice came from the nearby trees saying, "I forgive you, General. You may proceed." The wagon suddenly lurched forward, and all was well. Although there is no solid documentation, legend states that General Jackson and his men only stayed at the Bells for one night, and was reputed to have said that he would rather face the whole of the British Army than ever spend the night at the Bell farm again. No account of what took place that night has ever surfaced. Activity increased. Betsy was tormented on a daily basis now, and John Bell Sr. was dying. On December 20th, 1820, he passed away in his sleep. He had gone to bed the night before feeling particularly ill and never woke up. It was his son Drew that first discovered his passing and noticed a strange odor coming from his mouth. He investigated his father's medicine cabinet to figure out just what the hell he had taken, and found a vial of smoky liquid that had not previously been there. So in a rather cruel experiment, he put a tiny bit of the vial's contents on a hay straw and fed it to the family cat, which died almost instantly. Just as suspicions started to rise as to which family member could have possibly done this, the witch's familiar voice rang through the house saying, "I fixed his medicine last night, gave him a big dose of it. He'll never get up out of that bed again." John Bell Sr.'s death to this day remains the only death in United States history to be blamed on a supernatural entity. All of John's friends and neighbors, and even clergy from the church he was excommunicated from, were at his funeral, and so was the witch, as she cursed and laughed and screamed so loud that nobody could hear the ceremony. And with John's death came peace, at least for a while. In 1821, Betsy Bell became engaged to Joshua Gardner. They had been infatuated with each other for a while, and with their most staunch opponent, her father, out of the picture, they could finally court. And as soon as they did, the witch came back with a vengeance. All the activity had returned. But something had changed. The witch, once Betsy's tormentor, seemed to have taken a protective stance, pleading with her not to marry Joshua. And it worked. She called off the engagement, and heartbroken, Joshua moved away into obscurity. It was her school teacher, Richard Powell, who took a shine to her. He would visit the Bell farm occasionally when her father still lived, and told her parents how beautiful and smart she was. And if that's not creepy enough, he was already married to a woman named Esther Scott Powell. Curiously, she died in 1821, at about the same time Betsy and Joshua got engaged. Eventually, in March 1824, his affections won her heart, and she became Betsy Bell Powell. They had 8 children, but only one would survive to adulthood. The mortality rate of children at this point in American history was at about 50%, meaning 1 in every 2 births didn't make it to 18. But Betsy's case was tragic even by those standards. In 1875, Betsy, now an old widow, moved to Mississippi to spend the remainder of her years with her only surviving daughter, Permelia, and passed away on July 18, 1888, at the age of 82. Although her life was marked with hardship and tragedy, she said she lived basically a happy life. In 1993, Chris and Walter Kirby bought the Bell farm from the Eden family after having been searching for a plot of land to call their own for months. It seemed like fate had deemed it so, as every other offer they put in got declined and the Bell farm couldn't find any buyers. The Kirbys were so ecstatic to finally have their own farm that they all but dismissed the claims of the haunting. They knew the history, but didn't really care. until they moved in. The first night in the house found them waking up to phantom crashing sounds coming from somewhere. They searched the whole house and found nothing out of place. Chalking it up to a squirrel or one of their moving boxes shifting somehow, they all went back to bed. The next morning, Chris found a book on the kitchen counter called Echoes of the Bell Witch in Adams, Tennessee, and decided to flip through it while she enjoyed her morning coffee on the side porch. On page 30, she found a chapter named Breaking Glass, which described the events of the night before in great detail, happening for years before they even moved in. The situation began to sink in. The following days in her new home saw her dealing with phantom sounds of all types, scratching and disembodied voices, but none of it shook her resolve to stay put. They remain there still, giving tours of the Bell Witch Cave spring through fall, in which you can see the long since desecrated grave of a Native American child. Spirit photography is quite popular here, as there's a shadow figure lurking in one of the offshoot caves. Chris never goes down to the cave alone, and who can blame her? The Kirbys have many more stories about their time living with this legend and the spirit that comes along with it. For further reading, I personally suggest Bell Witch: The Truth Exposed by Camille Headley, available on Amazon for only $12. Cut to today, and strange events still seem to surround the witch. During a broadcast of a show featuring a segment about the Bell Witch, descendants of the Bell family still residing in Adams reported that when it aired, their television suddenly displayed static. All other stations worked fine. Perplexed, they went to their neighbor's house to see if the same thing was happening on their TV. To their amazement, the station was clear for a split second before it also went to static. Both TVs went back to normal after the segment was over, leaving both families to wonder what had just happened. Visitors to the Bell Witch Cave report misfortune if they take rocks as souvenirs home with them. The Kirbys consistently receive packages in the mail with cave rocks in them, pleading for the cursed rocks to be returned to the cave. The Bell family to this day experiences activity even though they've reconciled with the Batts family. If you ever find yourself traveling on I-24 north of Nashville and want to stretch your legs for a little bit, the Bell Witch Cave and Bell Cabin are open for day tours at a reasonable rate. Just check the website bellwitchcave.com first to make sure they're open. They may have another, less cordial party making its presence known. And leave the rocks out of your pockets. That is one of the all-time classic American ghost stories and one of my personal favorites. But now, let's hear from someone else who had more than their fair share of close encounters with whatever haunts their still. It's time to clock in for the graveyard shift. This story was written by Redditor The Lawson, in which he breaks down his experiences living next to the Bell farm into 9 separate events. He writes, I lived in Adams, Tennessee growing up from about ages 14 to 18, or 2004 to 2008. A couple of weeks after my family and I moved there, something unexpected happened. I was mowing on my dad's tractor with a big 8-foot wide back-end mower. I was going down a hill when my horizon line violently was thrown around as the tractor tires hit something. I disengaged the mower, pulled the tractor around at the base of the hill I had just gone down. My blood went cold as I looked up through the swath I had just cut. It looked like a buzzer going down the middle of someone's head making a lane in the grass. In that lane were 4 Native American burial graves. My parents started reaching out to anyone who might be able to help us identify the graves. Anthropologists, historians, accredited people, etc. These people unanimously agreed that these 4 graves were from the Trail of Tears. They corroborated this from what I remember because of how the graves were laid, very, very shallow, with a giant slab of stone where a gravestone would be. The fact that they were interned on a hillside to keep the water from sinking in and raising the bodies since they had to bury them so quickly, and many other reasons. I consider myself a very logically driven and rationally minded person. Basically, I let my empirical senses try to explain something before I'll open myself to other possibilities. Yet there were things that happened to me and my whole family that we weren't able to rationalize with the scientific mindset or anything logical. Event 1. The activity in our house started shortly after the mowing incident. We heard heavy knocking and pounding on the brick outer wall of the house, and circling the house. No matter where you were in the house, you could hear the knocking. Some nights I would hear running footsteps accompanying the pounding. This activity happened nearly every night. As the nights passed, I started feeling a heavy presence in the room, a suffocating one, like a heavy weight sitting on my solar plexus constantly. Whatever was happening decided to latch on to me. Event 2. Things continued to escalate. One night I was letting my golden retriever out to go pee. We had a ranch-style house overlooking the Red River. The door we were exiting was on the backside of the house facing the river. As I opened the door, I started hearing faint whispering, something akin to leaves being blown or scratching across the ground. I looked up at the trees to see if the wind was blowing. Everything was perfectly still. It was fall in Tennessee, so tons of leaves on the ground, but they were not moving either. The scratchy/blowing leaf noise continued, but as it continued, it grew louder and closer. It sounded like a language of some sort, like how you'd imagine an incantation or something nefarious in the tone of the sound. I looked down at my golden retriever. All of the hair on her back was standing up, and she was snarling like a rabid wolf, yet not barking, just kind of frozen in a fear response. I started getting extremely nauseous and could smell sulfur. I was completely frozen when my dog launched herself through the door's threshold and started gnashing her teeth mid-air, snarling and chomping. The voices were now coming from directly in front of me, and I could hear them as if someone was standing there a foot or two away. I grabbed my dog mid-air and pulled her inside quick, slammed the door and threw the deadbolt into place. The door and frame shook violently as a vicious pounding started hammering on the threshold. I ran with my dog to the center of the house, flipping on every light along the way. We sat there alone all night until the sun came up. Ginger, my golden retriever, laid across my lap the entire night, pressing into me while she whimpered for hours. All I could do was pet her and try to calm her down, which was also helping me downregulate. This was impossible, though, because through the entire night until sunrise, the back door was thumping. Event 3. It happened when I was coming home from football practice. I had all my gear in a gym bag over my left shoulder. This is important because of how I entered the house. As I closed the front door behind me, I began to take off the gear bag from my left side, which caused me to turn right. The room you first walked into in our house was our library, where we had a leather couch, a chair, piano, bookshelves, and a wooden rocking chair. There was something sitting in the rocking chair. My peripheral vision caught it first, the chair going back and forth. As my vision centered on the chair, there was a humanoid-looking shape sitting there, head glancing downward at the book it was holding. Long black hair drawn down over its head, and was completely devoid of light. To picture what I saw, imagine the silhouette of a person, but rather a void of light. The light coming in around the edges of it seemed to be eaten up by the present/void, as the light spilled over the contoured edges of the humanoid shape, like how black holes are visualized almost exactly. It felt like I had jumped off a bridge into ice-cold water. I blasted myself backwards against the door, screaming, and fell down. As I was falling, I saw the void blur suddenly as it shot across the walls of the house and out through a huge bay window overlooking the river. My golden retriever was in the next room, and she sprinted to chase the shadow across the walls, barking and clawing at them. After it left through the window, my dog came to me and laid on my lap until my parents got home. Event 4. I was fishing with my cousin Jack on the river by our house. We were right on the bend of a river, so the moon would be shining on both sides of the river, racing out at two lines like a 90-degree angle from the house. Super beautiful when you weren't on edge. The reason I bring this up, there was a lot of light on the river that evening. Jack was about 10 or so at the time. He reaches up and taps me, "Does that lady need help?" I looked to where he was pointing, and there was a pale woman dressed in white clothes going back and forth, picking up stones just to the left of us across the river. I had seen her many times before on the property, and whenever I would get close, she would disappear behind a tree or something similar would happen. Knowing this, I told Jack as calmly as I could that it was time for dinner and he needed to go up to my mom immediately in an attempt not to scare him. When I walked him up and made sure he was on his way, I looked back over and she was gone, but I could still hear a splashing in the water below. Event 5. Myself, my dad, his friends, and some other family members were staked out along the riverband on the gravel bar beneath the rise to our house. Nothing out of the ordinary at first. It was July 4th and we were having an actual good time for a change. We were all spread out about 15 yards from each other. Each man had a low-end gas Coleman lantern. As the sun was setting, my dad looks over at me like something was bugging him. He told me later he felt like someone had just thrown a bucket of ice water over him before it began. The sun had just gone down when this had happened. In unison, all the lanterns were cranked up full blast, then just as quickly became barely aflame. Then the fires roared to life again, back down to barely aflame, roared to life, then went completely out. Right as the flames went out, we heard the most godforsaken scream by some woman across the river. Whatever it was kept on screaming despite our best attempts to call out to help. As her scream reached a crescendo, it sounded like what I could only imagine a person's throat being cut would sound like interrupted her scream. The sound of a dead weight fall of a human body tumbled down the hillside across from us and splashed violently into the water. At this point, all the guys had their flashlights out. That's when something started swimming and splashing around in the water on both sides of the river bend. The splashing receded towards the opposite gravel bar, and whatever it was got out and started pacing back and forth across the rocks. We were pointing all of our flashlights to where the sound was coming from, but we couldn't identify where it was originating. It's safe to say we were running up the hill at this point. We all got inside the house, locked the doors, then gathered in the central living room. Nobody wanted to leave for fear of what was outside. We all stayed up that night because the wall pounding was more violent than it had ever been. Bam, 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 all night like the ticking of some demonic clock. I didn't sleep for 2 days after this event. Event 6. Lost time. I was walking through the woods near the Bell Witch Cave. One moment it was completely sunny and blue skies about mid-afternoon. The next moment it was overcast and looked like maybe 4 p.m. Event 7. Night terrors. Tortured dreams, being held down and brutally drawn and quartered. Dreams of walking through the house and the void person placing their hand on my chest and pushing through my solar plexus. Body violently shaking in the dream like having a seizure. Event 8. Visited the Bell House/plantation marker in a tobacco field adjacent to my family's property. I brought friends to try and prove that something crazy was happening to my family. The rite of passage in the area is to go to the stone marker where the paranormal events happened hundreds of years ago, then dance on the stone saying, "I don't believe in the Bell Witch." I got them to promise that they wouldn't do that while we went. Of course, the moment when we get there, the one guy who doubted the legends in a massive way jumps up onto the stone marker and starts screaming, "I don't believe in the Bell Witch," as loud as he could. I got so upset at him. I'm the only one that knows the way back, so I said, "Come on guys, we're leaving." This area is known as the Tennessee River Valley, so there's tons of flowing water around these tobacco fields. The reason this is important is because of what happened next. We're making good time walking back across this crop field, hundreds of yards long. A mist starts rolling in from the river bends and begins saturating the field. The temperature drops easily 25 degrees or so, and we start seeing our breath. I began to smell sulfur in the breeze. As the mist became a fog, it began. I started hearing this wheezy and deeply cavernous sounding breath around us, like being inside a cave that was breathing. Out of nowhere, we started hearing these giant blasting sounds, and I realized something was walking on the chopped tobacco stalks. Side note, when they harvest tobacco, they use a machete and cut down at 45-degree angles, leaving about 3.5 feet of brittle stalk poking out of the ground. And when you step on these stalks, they disintegrate in a very loud way as they burst apart. This starts happening all around us like an army of native spirits running around, as if we were in a bandwagon battle. The blasts were coming from every single direction in the fog. That's when I hear it. That deep cavernous noise turns into this giant sniffing sound, like some Lovecraftian beast smelling its prey just out of eyesight. At this point, I yell run in pure panic mode. We take off across the field trying not to trip and be skewered on the stalks. They dry out and get really sharp where they harvest them. And fun fact, Robertson County is the world's largest producer of tobacco per square mile, so these fields are everywhere. As we were exiting the field and our feet hit the gravel road, the lower center part of my back suddenly explodes in agony. I look down and there's a massive rock laying at my feet, and I realize that it had just been thrown at me. By the time I got to my house and examined my back in a mirror, the bruise was about the size of a basketball and was already turning black. Event 9. Woke up outside around 3 in the morning. I was laying next to the 4 graves on the property. The night was awfully cold, but I woke up soaked in sweat. It is really hard for me to talk about this stuff without re-traumatizing myself, but my friends and family are encouraging me to share my experiences with like-minded people so I can try to find peace surrounding my trauma. And that's the end of an epic edition of the Ghost Signal. If you've stuck around this long, I very much appreciate it. Visit theghostsignalpodcast.com for merch, the latest news and all things Ghost Signal, as well as www.patreon.com/The Ghost Signal Podcast to gain access to exclusive content. Join the Ghost Signal Discord server and hang out with other listeners from all across the globe. A quick shout out to the lovely Miss Kristen. Thank you for helping me keep my sanity over these past few weeks. You mean more to me than my words can say. The Ghost Signal is executively produced by Jason Wilson, custom sound beds by J.M. Scherf, video editing wizardry by Hale, creative direction by Cassie, and Patreon mastery by Brooks Bigley. And my name is Jeff, your friendly control operator and your ghost host with the most. The next time the Ghost Signal haunts your eardrums, we finish what we began in episode 2 and head back to Union, Missouri for part 2 of The House That Screams. So until then, dear listeners, spirits and specters, ending transmission. Reach me at theghostsignalpodcast@gmail.com.
This has been a Grey Rooms production. Copyright 2021 and 2022.
The ghost signal is lost. Transmission terminated.